Okay, I think we'll go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, and thank you so much for joining us. My name's Karen Basen-Engquist. I'm a professor of behavioral science at the University of Texas MD Anderson Cancer Center and also direct the Center for Energy Balance and Cancer Prevention and Survivorship there. Today's webinar is hosted by the Michael and Susan Dell Center for Healthy Living at the UT Health School of Public Health in Austin in collaboration with the Digital Physical Activity and Diet, or DPAD, collaborative, which is funded by a joint initiative, population health initiative of MD Anderson and UT Health. Could you go to the next slide, please? So I just want to share a little bit of information about DPAD. So we are creating this initiative because of the problem of overweight and obesity in Texas. It's such a significant public health issue. And we really need scalable solutions to solve this problem for Texans through addressing the modifiable determinants of eating behaviors and physical activity. We feel that digital tools can help provide some solutions, but we need more research on effective content, usable interfaces, and context-specific tailoring, and also want to be able to expand these tools among low-resource populations. So we want to kind of bring people together in a team science approach to develop and test more digital tools and do research in this area. Next slide, please. The way we're going about this is to, we started with a needs assessment to identify MD Anderson and UT Health investigators with relevant research interests. And if you haven't filled out our survey, let us know and we'll send it to you. And also provide some training and networking activities to support and connect digital health and obesity researchers, and then create some core services based on the needs assessment. So we welcome you to this webinar, which is one of our activities. We also have a number of other activities planned, including a symposium in September. And I will give you those dates at the end of this seminar. So with no further ado, I would like to introduce today's speaker, Dr. Larkin Strong. So Dr. Strong is an associate professor in the Department of Health Disparities Research at the University of Texas MD Anderson Cancer Center. A theme of her work is the recognition that health and health behaviors are embedded within social, physical, economic, and cultural contexts. Her research aims to understand how social, cultural, and environmental influences help to shape patterns of cancer preventive behaviors in minority and underserved populations, with the ultimate objective of translating research into findings into health promotion efforts that stimulate meaningful change in opportunities for an adoption of healthy lifestyles. She's interested in developing and evaluating innovative approaches to promote healthy lifestyles, with a particular emphasis on physical activity and healthy eating. Her research has been supported by grants from the National Institutes of Health, the American Cancer Society, and through institutional funding. So we welcome her today to talk about one of her studies involving use of existing technology to enhance physical activity in Black and Latina. So welcome, Dr. Strong.
All right, thank you so much. And it's great to be here to be able to present as part of this webinar. So I will just go ahead and jump in and get started. Now, you know, as suggested by the title, I am not presenting on new technology. However, I do want to share the ways in which we've incorporated and we're using existing technology within particular particular intervention that I'm going to share with you. So just to first provide an overview of my talk today, I'm going to provide some background in social environments and physical activity because that is really the focus of the intervention. I'll share with you a pilot study that was conducted a number of years ago and how we built upon that to then be able to get funded for and design an efficacy trial, which we are in the middle of, but we have not actually started recruitment. So this is really just presenting sort of the study design. And I'll conclude a little bit with incorporation of technology, but technology, discussions about technology and how we're using it will also be incorporated throughout. So I will go ahead and begin. So first of all, I'm sure that many on this webinar, recognize that social environments, that individuals are embedded within social networks, and that's a part of their social environment. And, these social networks really create opportunities for behavioral influence. And as you can imagine, these influences can be both positive and negative. The literature shows that physical activity is strongly associated with social and cultural norms. We can think about gender role expectations, how that may vary within people of different cultures, as well as different families, and then also just cultural appropriateness of using your leisure time to engage in physical activity. So there's a lot to think about when we think about how the social environment influences our behavior, and specifically physical activity. Okay, this is a study I wanted to highlight that really illustrates sort of I guess it shows the spread of obesity within social networks, and this was using data from the Framingham Heart Study. And so they looked at participants in that study. They were followed for over 30 years. And so they had lots and lots of data on people as the participants, and they were able to look at social networks within these groups. And so what this is showing here is they're showing the probability that an ego, or you could think of that as like an index participant, will become obese over time according to the type of relationship with an alter who's a member of their social network, who may become obese in several subgroups. And as I mentioned, this is of the social network of the Framingham Heart Study. And so, what this shows is that when a mutual friend becomes obese, that increases the risk of obesity in the ego. And this particular relationship is the one with the strongest, this particular friend relationship is the one with the strongest relationship with the increased risk in obesity. In addition, you see same-sex friend, we see spouse and sibling, but these are all weaker. And I think what's also interesting to point out is that we have immediate neighbor here that really doesn't show an increase in risk. And so that's showing, that it's not necessarily the immediate geographical environment in this case, but what they're looking at is it's the friend environment. So that also, illustrates another impact or a way in which our social environments contribute to our health behaviors and health outcomes. So what I wanted to talk about in terms of particular component of the social context is social support. And I'm sure many on this webinar are very familiar with this, but just to kind of make sure we're all on the same page here. Social support refers to resources provided by others. And so within the context of physical activity, we can think about that in terms of encouragement to be active, actions taken by others that facilitate being active, and also having someone with whom to be active. Now, social support is intended to be helpful, but whether or not it actually is, remains to be seen by the person who's receiving it. But what we do find within the literature is that social support is positively associated with physical activity across racially, ethnically, and socioeconomically diverse groups of women. The literature also shows that women seek support for physical activity. And so studies of racially, ethnically diverse women provide support for the potential appeal of approaches that involve existing members of one social network. So these studies indicate that women desire encouragement and support for physical activity from important people in their lives. They seek to exercise with others. That tangible support in the form of direct help or assistance can facilitate engagement in physical activity, and also that seeing others in their communities and their social networks be active is important to feeling comfortable and confident about exercising. And this last part, is getting at the cultural and gender norms that I was mentioning earlier. So knowing this, I think we can all agree, we know that social support is important for physical activity, and particularly for women. But an important question does remain that how do we translate the benefits of social support into effective intervention approaches? What are effective channels or combination of channels for delivering social support interventions? If we look at the literature, and specifically a dyad-based approach, so enrolling someone else or enrolling two people in a study to participate in an intervention together, what we see is that overall there are mixed findings. Now, I should mention that my former postdoc, Jemima John, has been working on a systematic review of dyad-based interventions, not only for physical activity, but also for dietary behaviors as well as weight loss. And so, this is not finalized, it's not published yet, but I do just want to share some brief highlights that overall there are mixed findings, but that family or friend involvement in weight loss programs can have benefits, and that these effects are greatest when partners are highly engaged and social support is explicitly addressed. And in particular, one study found that support from friends was more beneficial than support from unconnected persons within the context of behavior therapy for weight loss. And importantly, there are very few studies that have looked at dyadic interventions within minority populations. So what I'm going to share with you first, as I mentioned, is a pilot study. It was called Fitness Tracking Together, or Project Fit. It was a feasibility study, and the objective was to conduct a pilot intervention trial focused on African American Hispanic women's physical activity to inform the design of a subsequent larger RCT. And so just to provide some background, again, many of you are familiar with this, but just to bring us all together, we know that, within the United States, most Americans are not meeting physical activity recommendations. This is specifically focused on leisure time physical activity recommendations. And what we see here is that men generally are more active than women. And we also see lower levels of physical activity, meeting physical activity recommendations among Hispanic and Black women compared to white women. Another important factor, as I just mentioned, is that racial ethnic minorities tend to be underrepresented in research, particularly, as I noted, interventions that involve enrolling with another partner, dyadic interventions. So that was an important sort of rationale and reasoning behind wanting to focus on these populations within this study. So this study was conducted a number of years ago. As you can see, 2015 to 2016, the technology landscape back then was quite different, particularly when we think about the use of mobile technology and fitness trackers. But nonetheless, it continues to provide some good insight for research today. So the first part of the aim for this study was to qualitatively explore women's preferences for a physical activity promotion intervention that uses existing mobile technology and builds off of women's social networks. Now, I will say that part I'm not going to discuss today, but I just want to mention that work was conducted. Second, to assess the feasibility of recruitment, retention, and implementation of study procedures in a pilot group randomized trial of a social network-based intervention in inactive, predominantly Black and Latina women, and assess the acceptability and appeal of the intervention and study procedures through post-intervention focus groups. All right, so for this study, it was a group randomized trial with the dyads being the group. And so we had 56 women enrolled as 28 social network dyads. The dyads were the unit of randomization, and we recruited women from existing institutional cohorts as well as community outreach. The intervention that we implemented took place over 16 weeks, and assessments were conducted at baseline, 8 weeks, and that was online only or over the phone. It was not in person, as well as 16 weeks. So the intervention design, so first of all, The components included telephone coaching, an activity monitor, and health education newsletters. So the telephone coaching, this was dyad based, so women participated in the coaching calls together. The idea was to enhance knowledge and skills for behavior change, address emotional and informational support. It included a motivational approach, and it took place, or it included 6 calls over the 16-week period. And this is where, as women were participating in it together, it was designed to, increase their individual behavioral skills, as well as build their capacity to be a supportive partner. The next part was the activity monitor. And as I mentioned, the technology landscape has changed. We used the Jawbone Up, which was a plug-in monitor. And the reason for that, doing that at that time, was over concerns regarding Bluetooth capabilities of phones that people owned back then. And so again, using the activity monitor, this was designed to enhance behavioral skills, specifically self-monitoring, allow people to connect with their study partner by being able to monitor both, not only their own, but also their partner's activity, and as a result, facilitate some support. And then finally, health education newsletters. They were sent 6 issues over the 16 weeks, the timing aligned with counseling calls. These were very much, based on just publicly available health education. They were disseminated via email and were mobile friendly. So the control condition was also a dyad. So the dyads were randomized to either the intervention or the control. And this was sort of a hybrid waitlist control. So during the intervention period, the control dyads received the health education newsletters, and then upon completion of their 16-week assessment, they were provided with the Jawbone Up. And so these are the characteristics of the study participants. In general, high rates of obesity. We had not only Black and Hispanic women in this study, because we did not want to restrict the race ethnicity of women's partners. And so our recruitment focused on those populations, but as you can see, we had a few other race ethnicities. In terms of education, most of them had at least some college. And in terms of household income, again, most were above 50,000 annual household income. So in terms of partner characteristics, the relationships, somewhat evenly distributed across family and friend, and then we find work acquaintance, and finally other. Oops, sorry. And we asked people to respond regarding the closeness with their partner, which ranged from 1 to 5, and the mean closeness response was 4.2. So these are certainly people with whom, women felt close and comfortable. And so when we asked, how often do you usually communicate with your partner? The majority said every day or almost every day. All right, so now just briefly getting into some of our findings. Now, as you all know, this is a pilot study. We were not powered for statistical significance, but nonetheless, I just thought I would share some results because I know that's always of interest. Now, this is weekly minutes of log transformed, self-reported, moderate to vigorous physical activity. And so what we found is that there was, a greater increase among the intervention women shown in purple compared to the control. That did, sort of decrease or attenuate over time. This was not statistically significant, but just showing you the relationships and the patterns that we found here. In addition, when we looked at objective physical activity, this is measured by the accelerometer, not a lot of increase, but there is some decrease in the control. So, you see a difference between the self-reported and the objective physical activity, which is not entirely surprising. And then this is daily minutes of objective sedentary time and bouts, also measured by the accelerometer. So we did see some decreases there. Really where we actually saw some significance were in our hypothesized mediators. So what we were trying to do with the intervention, as I mentioned, was trying to enhance the capacity of women to be a supportive partner. As we all know, as people try to be supportive, there is a fine line between actually being supportive and potentially, you know, having more of a negative influence. And so measuring social control and specifically persuasion was the positive aspect. And so we did see that that increased over time in the intervention group and not the control group. In addition, physical activity related social support also increased over time within the intervention group. So in general, these were you know, encouraging findings to sort of continue exploring and working within this area. Certainly, you know, as I'll get into detail later, there's some things that we wanted to modify and address. In terms of intervention engagement, we did find good levels of engagement. So we found that all dyads completed at least 4 of the 6 counseling calls. 87% completed 5 calls together. Just a little over half completed all 6 calls together, and the vast majority of calls did have both participants participating. Now, device wear, again, this was the jawbone up. This is the median percent of days that the device was worn. We found that it started off very high, and then with time, particularly beginning in month 3, started to fall. In terms of satisfaction, we did find high levels of satisfaction, that women were likely to recommend this program to their family or friends. The counseling sessions were helpful. However, the program was effective for me was 69%. So clearly they liked it. However, you know, there's room for improvement in terms of it being effective. And also the jawbone was easy to use. We found that 72% said that, and we did have a number of problems with the device, you know, which certainly made us think about what type of device to use in the future. So in terms of our post-intervention focus group findings, we found that in general, women were very satisfied with the health coaching. So one woman said, I loved the monthly coaching calls from our coach. It kept us moving forward. I liked that to see if we were still connected and if we were still working, how our relationship was going. Another woman said, I like the idea of setting the goals and the accountability in revisiting the goals. For example, the health coach would ask, hey, how did you do on this? Because you said you were going to do this. Did you actually accomplish it? Also, they enjoyed friendly competition. So one woman said, if my partner was out and she did a lot of movement, I said, okay, well, I can't sit here and watch this movie that I want to watch. I need to get up and go for a walk. It was a challenge in the competition, being able to see her numbers, which encouraged me to get up and move. In addition, appreciating the dyadic approach. A woman said, it's nice to be supported. I know I had one rough week at work where I went off the grid. I wasn't walking. Yeah, I went off and my partner was like, are you okay? Another woman said, I could see what she had done and she could see what I had done, like an accountability thing. If I fell short, she'd text me or call me and say, Mom, what's going on? What happened today? Or if I met the goal, she'd shoot me a little text. Great job, Mom. However, not everybody appreciated the dyadic approach. So one woman did say, I didn't think it was that important to me to have an accountability partner. I let her talk about her progress, but I wasn't asking her about her progress every day. She was always the initiator. I was like, oh my gosh, not today. So certainly there is, you know, we found variability in terms of how people responded to being to participating and being involved with a partner. And so that was certainly another piece that we wanted to think about moving forward. So what we learned, first of all, the feasibility of the intervention and study procedures was generally positive. We had good compliance with counseling calls. As I mentioned, we had some issues with the device. Now, of course, that was the jawbone up. It's not even on the market today. and so I don't think necessarily the issues that came up with that are relevant now. We did have good retention at final follow-up. I realize I don't think I mentioned that. I apologize. It was the final follow-up. I think it was close to 90%. And we had high levels of satisfaction with the intervention overall and the dyadic approach. So, in general, we felt this provided preliminary support for the use of a social network-based intervention to promote physical activity in inactive and predominantly Black and Latina women. But we certainly had things that we wanted to, consider based on our findings. But this does bring us, and I'll get into those in a moment. This does bring us to the next phase of the study, which is now has a new title called Women on the Move. And I will share a little bit about why we changed the title as well. And so the objective for this study is to test the efficacy of a 6-month dyadic behavioral intervention compared to an individual behavioral intervention to increase moderate to vigorous physical activity in 500 inactive, predominantly Latina and Black women. So the specific aim of this study is to determine whether the dyadic behavioral intervention produces greater engagement in moderate intensity or greater physical activity compared with the individual behavioral intervention. And the primary outcomes are change in self-reported and objective minutes per week of moderate vigorous physical activity. The secondary aims are to determine the effects of the dyadic behavioral intervention on hypothesized intervention mechanisms. This includes autonomous motivation, social support, autonomy support, self-efficacy, and then the associations of those mechanisms with physical activity outcomes. So that's trying to get at, mediation. Next, to determine the effects of the dyadic behavioral intervention on secondary outcomes, which include cardiorespiratory fitness, blood pressure, anthropometric measures, mean daily steps, and sedentary time, compared with the individual behavioral intervention. And then finally, to determine whether the dyadic behavioral intervention produces greater engagement of moderate to vigorous physical activity compared with the individual control. So these are some things that we added to this study design after having completed the pilot. So as you may have noticed, we changed the comparison to an individual intervention. And the reason for doing this is that we did feel like it would provide stronger scientific contribution regarding the potential benefits of a dyadic approach. So in the pilot study, we looked at a dyadic intervention compared to a dyadic control. And doing so, there was a reason for doing that. And part of it was thinking about, if somebody doesn't enroll with a partner, then, how can you tell if it's the intervention itself? And then also the need to, have people enroll with a partner so that there's not bias or differences between people who enroll with a partner and those who don't. And, as you begin to think about it, as you design a study that is focused on dyads or some sort of, group, trying to figure out how best to test the effectiveness of that approach compared to an individual intervention or some other intervention becomes very complicated. And so there are pros and cons to all approaches. So there will also be some limitations with this approach. However, we felt like this was a more rigorous approach, and as I mentioned, would provide stronger scientific contributions. We also felt like with this change, this would yield insight regarding potential mechanisms for change between the individual and dyadic intervention. And so for this study, our research question is very much focused on, is adding or is participating in the intervention with a partner, does that, produce change above and beyond participating in the intervention as an individual? So another thing that we added to this study design is that we added structured activities to enhance women's ability to be a supportive partner and to increase engagement among the partners. So what we found in the pilot, as you could see through some of the qualitative comments, is that, you know, the women had fun, you know, monitoring each other's behaviors, some of them, and some of them would engage in challenges through the app or on their own. And so that was something that we encouraged, but it was not a structured component of the intervention. And so we felt like we wanted to bring, make that a stronger piece. And then in addition, also enhancing women's ability to be a supportive partner. And I'll get into that in a little bit later. Then finally, we provided Fitbit devices to all participants. You know, obviously Fitbits have been used extensively in research. There's the potential concern that, you know, the Fitbits are an intervention in and of themselves, and that, you know, one can certainly make that argument. I think what we found in the literature is that, you know, for very short-term interventions, that may be the case, but with time, the benefits of Fitbits really come from being part or being integrated with a multi-component intervention. So one of the reasons we did this was to ensure consistency in devices and data monitoring, because today, given, you know, much more widespread use, this approach really recognizes that many people already have access to some form of a self-monitoring device, whether they have their own or they use their cell phone. And so we didn't feel like we could expect there to be a true control without a Fitbit. And so this way we are able to, as I mentioned, ensure consistency, and we can monitor activity and use. So this is a study design for the RCT. Again, it's a group randomized trial. Women still enroll with a family or friend as a partner. And so they are randomized as a dyad. But what happens is they first get randomized to either be in the dyadic condition or in the individual condition. Those who are in the dyadic condition, they're in the dyadic intervention and they're done with randomization. Those who are randomized to the individual condition will be randomized again, such that one participant will be randomized to the individual intervention and the other participant will be randomized to the individual control. So then the intervention will take place over 6 months. And then following that, they'll participate in an assessment. And then finally, again, another one at 12 months post-baseline. So I wanted to say some about our conceptual framework for this intervention. It draws from social cognitive theory, self-determination theory, and interdependence theory. I imagine many of you are familiar with these, probably most so with social cognitive theory, but just briefly, as we know, this is an interpersonal level theory, and it really emphasizes a dynamic interaction between people, their behavior, and the environments. So certainly that was an important theory to include here, and that is really what we focused on within the pilot intervention. Self-determination theory, you know, we started to look more at self-determination and specifically autonomous motivation for this study. And so self-determination theory, you know, recognizes or stipulates that behavioral motivation spans a continuum from autonomous to controlled, and that an individual who's driven by autonomous motivation feels very self-directed, they're more likely to achieve and sustain their desired change than someone who tends to be, their motivation tends to be more controlled. And that autonomy, competence, and relatedness are important factors that help to nurture and support autonomous motivation. And so we felt like this would help guide our intervention as we sought to really try to enhance women's capacity to be a supportive partner. We did, you know, that was the focus of the intervention in the pilot. However, you know, we felt that there was more that we could be done, particularly recognizing that everybody's support interests and support needs are different, And as we saw with that one particular quote, the one woman felt like she was getting too much from her study partner. And then finally, interdependence theory, which emphasizes the reciprocal nature of dyadic relationships. It just, reminds us and makes us think about how change in one person can affect change in another. So this is, this may be hard to follow, but this is an illustration of the conceptual framework. And so what I would just like to point out here is that we have the two dyad members shown here. And so we do that to show that, the changes in one can affect changes in another at all of these different levels, at the level of the interpersonal mediators, psychosocial mediators, and certainly behavioral outcomes. So these are the factors that we sought to focus on for the intervention: social support, relatedness, autonomy support, and positive communication, as well as self-efficacy or competence, building autonomous motivation, enhancing outcome expectancies, and enhancing physical activity enjoyment. All right, so now giving you a brief description of the various intervention conditions. So this is individual health education. They basically receive a Fitbit, and they receive health education newsletters. So these, they receive 12 newsletters over 6 months. These are publicly available. They provide publicly available health education on physical activity. There are links to exercise videos, and they're delivered by email or text. The individual health coaching intervention includes those two components, and then includes the health coaching, which is essentially traditional behavioral health coaching using a motivational interviewing approach. And so this is ideally conducted over Zoom. We propose 12 sessions. And as you can see here, this outlines the timing of them. And so the first, they begin once a week, and then they begin to taper off, so that the last 2 months they take place once a month. And when we originally wrote this grant, this was right before COVID, and we were proposing to use the same approach that we used in the pilot, which was telephone coaching. However, after everything we've all been through, that started to feel a little disappointing to not be able to offer the video conferencing. And so, through various work done on various other studies during COVID and such, we felt comfortable being able to, offer and encourage the use of Zoom for the health coaching sessions. And, we do want to recognize that for some people it may be a challenge. And so if they cannot do it over Zoom, we will do it over the phone. But our preferred method will be Zoom to start off with. And so just a little bit of background with the health coaching. So in terms of motivational interviewing, this is a collaborative, goal-oriented, person-centered approach that's designed to strengthen autonomous motivation for behavior change. The health coach respects participants' autonomy and choices regarding her behavior. So it's certainly, this is not an intervention where things are prescripted or directed. This is working with the participants to identify what it is that they're interested and able to feel comfortable sort of committing to. So it includes techniques such as active listening, asking rather than making assumptions, offering empathy, and speaking in a non-judgmental manner. Key behavioral skills include self-monitoring of physical activity using the Fitbit, setting incremental and achievable goals, as well as problem solving to overcome barriers. So the dyadic coaching intervention, includes all of these same components, except obviously the partners then participate in the health coaching sessions together. And just to go into a little bit more detail, this is where we started to flesh out some of the ways in which we were going to really focus on building women's capacity to being a supportive partner. So first is identifying women's support needs. So exploring past experiences, receiving support, discussing the type of support that women believe they need. Also practicing autonomy supportive behaviors. So this would be, during these coaching sessions, women would identify characteristics of a supportive interpersonal environment. The health coaches will model these positive communication strategies. And one of the activities that we will do is have participants practice these strategies in role play scenarios. And we did not do this in the pilot. However, we have done role plays in other studies and sort of illustrating, positive communication strategy and a negative communication strategy. And from our, anecdotal experience, participants do tend to enjoy those, and they really highlight these differences in the way that communication can be delivered. Okay, and additional dyadic coaching components include developing a mutual support plan. So this is where this will be developed for each participant. The plan will describe each participant's support needs and the ways for her partner to be supportive. So it may include both direct and tangible support, as well as autonomy support, which autonomy support primarily refers to respecting someone's autonomy. So that if they say, I just want you to check in and listen, then, that's what that is. It's not necessarily, reaching out and providing words of encouragement or, trying to do things. It's just basically respecting whatever it is that they want in terms of their support. And then finally, engaging in weekly partner activity. And so, as I mentioned, women in the pilot, did some of this, and it wasn't structured. And so we wanted to make it a little bit more structured. And so this, this does not need to be something that they do in person together, because we recognize that there are challenges to that. It could be where they engage in a challenge or a friendly competition using a Fitbit or some other app or approach. Maybe they do exercise together, or maybe they try a new class, or try a new exercise video together. It's just something to encourage them to touch base about physical activity each week. Okay, and then when we're working with different populations, I do want to address just how we are enhancing cultural sensitivity, because as I mentioned, we are specifically focusing on certain groups within this study. And so this includes incorporating surface structure elements that include things like having the intervention materials and research intervention staff reflect the characteristics of our populations of interest. So, we have Spanish language materials, images of diverse women, bilingual and bicultural staff, as well as deep structure elements. So incorporating issues of salience to the population, specifically thinking about cultural norms and beliefs. So, things that the literature suggests are the importance of family, the role of women as caregivers, perceived norms around women exercising, concerns regarding safety and access to physical activity opportunities or resources, concerns regarding hair maintenance. These are things that may come up naturally within the health coaching sessions when discussing barriers or just their attempts to reach their goals or physical activity. And so we definitely want want our health coaches to be familiar and sensitive to these. And certainly motivational interviewing is well suited for problem solving to address barriers and issues that participants may face. So it does lend itself well to that. So as I mentioned, for health coach training, we'll include in-depth training and factors associated with physical activity engagement and common barriers in our population of interest. Of course, also recognizing there's heterogeneity within groups. I also want to mention that we are using a community engaged research approach to ensure that there's community input into the research process. So we do meet with a community advisory board. And then I also want to just briefly mention, put in a plug for the community scientist program. For those of you who are at UT Health Houston or UT Health Tyler, MD Anderson, this is a wonderful resource where community scientists provide feedback about anything that you are interested in. And I've actually met with them on this study. They've provided feedback about the role play sessions and other aspects of the intervention. And finally, making study visits accessible and convenient. So we use community sites for in-person assessments and offer study visits during evening and weekend hours. This shows the eligibility criteria. I won't go through all of these. I do just want to highlight. So women do need to have a smartphone. You know, they do need to be willing to use the Fitbit app and device, and willing and able to send and receive text messages. And so one thing that I wanted to mention is that when you do studies that you know, do have these requirements, although you know, most of us think, well, that's very ubiquitous within the population. Do we really, you know, how much do we need to worry about that? Well, I do think it's important to check. So I wanted to just, you know, sort of highlight here for everybody some data related to technology access. So this comes from the Pew Research Center, and they show that Black and Hispanic adults in the US are less likely than white adults to have a traditional computer and home broadband. So we can see, you know, those differences here up top. However, it is interesting to note that there's, you know, pretty much no difference in smartphone ownership or tablet computer ownership. So that certainly, you know, has implications for how we design and deliver our interventions. Then, if we look at this one here, it says Americans with lower incomes have lower levels of technology adoption. So we do see, you know, in terms of smartphone usage, there's difference by income, certainly desktop or laptop computer usage and home broadband. So we do see a lot of differences on this side by income. Then I also wanted to look at, well, this goes into a little bit more detail of smartphone ownership. These numbers are the same in terms of race, ethnicity, and then we do see differences by education and also income, similar to before. I also wanted to look at, you know, who wears fitness trackers. And, you know, there's not a lot of data on that. This is from 2020, also from the Pew Research Center. And so we don't actually see that much difference by race, ethnicity. We see a lot by education and also income. And so, you know, I show this just to highlight that, you know, when we're considering various approaches, it is important to look at, are there people who we may be excluding, or even if not excluding because maybe they have the access, but it's also important to think about comfort level and ability. And so these, you know, these just have important implications when we think about the design and who the intervention may appeal to. So now moving on for recruitment, we are focused on recruiting Latina and Black women. We're going to use approaches we've done previously, which is leveraging relationships with community and faith-based organizations and community outreach, various events and organizations, and working through our community partners channels. I know we're getting short on time, so I will be fairly brief here. This is just to show our various study procedures. So surveys, objective physical activity, anthropometrics, cardiorespiratory fitness with the 2-minute step test, blood pressure, and then we'll also look at mean daily steps using Fitbit and specifically Fitabase to monitor that activity in real time. And then briefly, so just to sort of summarize a little bit about, you know, how some other ways that we're incorporating technology that I don't think we would have done all of these things sort of prior to some prior to COVID and just the extensive use of remote options now. But we are doing a virtual orientation. And so, you know, this is so that we can provide a more detailed description of the study to people who are interested. They have the opportunity to ask questions. And really the motivation for this is so that we can enhance retention and participation or compliance with the study activities. And so that'll be done over Zoom. It's intended to be brief, but it provides, you know, just provides more in-depth understanding. Certainly we're using the Fitbits. This is important for self-monitoring. You know, everybody can use it for self-monitoring. We are specifically interested in it within the dyadic intervention because we do want women to monitor not only their own, but also their partners as a way to stay abreast of, you know, what they're doing and be able to be supportive. Of course, you know, being consistent with what they've decided within their mutual support plan. We're doing a lot of text reminders, automated text reminders for study visits, coaching sessions, device wear. And, you know, this can all integrate with REDCap and Fitabase now. So that's, you know, really helpful. I've used text reminders before, but they weren't as well integrated previously. So I'm looking forward to that. We're also using text messages, automated text messages to deliver brief surveys. So this will include evaluation of health coaching sessions, as well as questions assessing participation in the partner activity. These are designed to be very brief, 2 questions. And also the electronic newsletter. So these are designed to be delivered via text or email. If somebody really, you know, is not amenable to that, we can send them via snail mail. But you know, our preference is to deliver them electronically. And these will contain links to brief exercise videos, recognizing, you know, that not everyone has the ability to go to the gym or, you know, safe nearby places to exercise. So we wanted to also include some things that they could do in their homes. Okay, so just to conclude, so I think, you know, dyad-based intervention studies, which I've talked about here, I think there's a lot to be learned. And so, you know, it's an opportunity to learn. We have a lot to learn about it because, you know, research has been conducted, but certainly more is needed. And this includes looking at the potential benefits and utility of dyad-based interventions, how to operationalize and nurture support. I think, although we think, you know, we think that people may have a sense of what it means to provide social support or be supportive. You know, I think that's not necessarily the case. And so I think we're still figuring out how can we best help people, you know, become a more supportive partner. And then, you know, this is moving beyond the individual level. It is the interpersonal level, but there are still barriers that will be beyond individual and interpersonal levels that will still need to be addressed. So of course, you know, multi-level interventions are still going to be needed to effectively address behaviors. And finally, just technology has an important role to play, both in the delivery of the intervention, as well as, you know, study design and procedures. And I think, you know, moving forward, we'll see more of that. And, you know, we have not implemented this study yet. We have added some new things, so it will be interesting to see how all of those play out. So I will stop there, and I want to thank you all for your attention. And I will just conclude here by thanking everyone who's been involved in these efforts. So thank you very much, and we will open it up for questions.
Okay, thank you very much for that presentation, Dr. Strong. We have a few minutes for questions, and I'm gonna kick it off with a question that I have. So, you know, in individual interventions, we often use activity monitors like the Fitbit for self-monitoring, and that's kind of the behavior change technique and that we associate with the Fitbits. But how can you talk a little bit more about how you're using them in a dyadic intervention and how it kind of fits into the dyadic theories that you're using?
Right, great question. So, you know, certainly with the Fitbits, we will instruct them within the dyadic intervention how to, you know, friend their partners. so that they can, not only monitor their own steps, but also see that of their partner. We also plan to instruct them in, the various things that you can do with Fitbits, using challenges and those activities that involve some friendly competition with people that you can select. But I think what's important is that we do want to see to what extent the participants are interested in doing that as part of their receiving support from their partners. So some people may be really into it, may appreciate the competition, may appreciate the comments on their progress, whereas others may not. So, to the extent, how much the Fitbit is truly, used will really depend on how people identify what it is they're interested in terms of receiving support. And it may be trial and error. Maybe let's try this, and oh yeah, that was great, or no, I didn't like that, it stressed me out, or something like that.
So you're keeping it very participant directed in how they want to use those different features. Interesting, thanks. So we have some questions from the audience. One question was about your pilot test and looking at the frequency of partner communications. Were you able to understand if the communication included the discussion of the physical activity and the program and the participant goals?
That's a good question. No, we did not. We were not able to. I think back then the devices were still relatively new, and we were hoping that women would use the app, the Jawbone app, to communicate with each other, and then we were able to see that and monitor that. So we did record their comments. However, a lot of women also continued to text and communicate in that way. So I don't think we, which obviously we're not privy to. So I think, we just have a snapshot. So we don't know to what extent they were specifically talking about the program or the intervention.
Great, thanks. And then a question about whether your health coaches are culturally diverse.
Yes, so they are. So I have had somebody working with me helping to design the intervention who has lots of experience with motivational interviewing, and she is a Latina woman herself. We also just hired one who is also a Latina woman, and we do plan to hire another one. And so thus, the two who I've worked with have, experience working with diverse populations, as well as being a member of one of the groups themselves.
Okay, great, thank you. Just one more question, and then we'll have to wrap this up. But there's a question about whether the study covers the cost of the devices, and I also would like to kind of add on to that, like what you think are sort of the pros and cons of using existing technology that people can get anywhere, right? That they don't have to get it through the study. Do you think that's sort of a plus or not so much?
Well, that's a really good question. So we do provide the Fitbits. It's theirs to keep after the study. So we do cover that. I think there are pros and cons to using existing technology. I think, as we know, the technology continues to evolve very rapidly. So what you can do on one today may change, a few years down the road. But it is one component of it. And so, it's really designed to enhance the intervention. It is not like the, the foundational piece of it. I think the foundational piece of it is, the health coaching and the focus on autonomy support and all of that. So, for the purposes of this study, I think it makes sense to use existing technology. For other studies, depending on what the focus is, it may, if it doesn't exist, what you're trying to design or implement, then that would make sense to develop it yourself. But for this, yes, I felt existing was appropriate.
Okay, thanks. Well, it looks like we are out of time, but thank you very much, Dr. Strong, for your presentation, and thank you everyone for attending today's webinar. We want to remind you that the webinar will be archived on the Michael and Susan Dell Center website at msdcenter.org. So thanks again for joining us today, and we will see you next time.
Thank you.